Let us begin. Rand Paul getting far too much credit for passing of the Freedom Act. Most Americans still have no clue what all this hassling about metadata really means. Add to that how a simple one-word label changes perception of a police shooting and why a little smoke in your kid's lungs is such a big deal after all. Right out of the box with Washington Examiner senior writer Sean Higgins, joined by veteran broadcast journalist and founder of Jane Unchained, Jane Velez-Mitchell. I thank you both for joining us, and let's get right to work because we got a lot of things to cover here. Sean, I'm going to start with you. Interesting how in the NSA spying bill here, as we all go between Freedom Act and whatever other act seems to be making its rounds around the Beltway these days, you have Rand Paul and John McCain vote together against the bill. Now, Rand Paul says this tramples on civil rights. John McCain says it doesn't give us what we need. Nobody seems to be satisfied here into what we now have in place for surveillance. In your opinion, who's right? Is this a civil rights issue, or are we hampering ourselves in a fight against terror?
It's a good question because the whole thing with metadata is very, very confused. It really depends on the experts you talk to, because there will be civil rights groups who claim, well, you look at this study and it'll show that we didn't find anyone, and then there are other cases where it appears as though it did find people. I'm personally of the preference of erring on the side of caution in collecting more data rather than less.
Now, Jane,
although I understand that's kind of a unfortunate opinion.
It isn't a lot of people listen to that right away and they go, wait a minute now. But I'll tell you what, Jane, he makes a very good point, because already there are people out there pleading with Congress today to please let us get back to doing some sort of surveillance here, because ISIS, terrorism, other people are out there, and they claim that they are handcuffed without all of this.
Yeah, let's do surveillance. Let's not do bulk collection of everybody's phone data. There are not 300 million plus terrorists. The number of terrorists are a relative handful. Those are the people they should be focusing on. But with this,
but you got to find them first, Jane. You've got to go through millions of people and find those one or two before you actually get down to it.
You don't do it with bulk data collection.
You do sometimes need the bulk amounts of information just simply to find what you're looking for in the first place.
Okay, now there's that bulk of information, Jane.
When you talk about detective work, a lot of times you got the information right in front of you. When those two terrorists attacked people in Garland, Texas recently, they were heavily armed. It turned out one of them was on the FBI's watch list already. So people ask, well, why was he able to go in heavily armed? Why weren't you following him? Oh, we can't afford to follow people 24/7, 365. Well, if they stopped collecting millions of Americans' data unnecessarily, they would have the resources to follow the relative handful of actual potential terrorists. What they're doing now is depriving you and me of our civil rights and our freedoms. I don't want the U.S. government knowing every single person that I call every day. Because you know what? I call a lot of environmentalists. I call a lot of animal rights activists. Next thing you know, they're going to call me an eco-terrorist.
Jane, let's get onto it. Wait a minute now. We're talking about metadata, Jane. We're talking about metadata here. We're not talking about every single stitch of information that you have on your phone. Let's be fair on that. But let me just ask, and again, Sean, I want to start with you. Well, but it's metadata, though. It is not the overall phone records. So, Sean, let me get to you on this. Personally, and this is just me, if the government wants to check where my phone calls are going, I have no problem with it. Because quite frankly, I guess there are a lot of people like me who say, keep me safe, don't let me get killed in an airplane plowing into a building, and don't let me get shot in the head by somebody out there one day. I'm okay with it. So, Sean, am I just one of those people who happens to be on the fringe maybe of this, in the minority?
I don't think you're in the fringe. You may even be in the majority. I mean, look, there are principled arguments against this, and certainly a collection of the data can be abused. On the other hand, I mean, the bottom line is you do need to gather data and you do need to find stuff out. And it's not as though they're snooping the actual content of the phone calls. They're just collecting, as you point out, the data of who you're calling and when. And that's still pretty revealing a lot of times about what you're doing. But again. We are talking about finding and preventing, and I still am of the mindset, and I'm sort of old-fashioned, kind of a stick in the mud in this, that it's better to err on the side of precaution. That doesn't mean that there can't be some limits on how it's collected or how long it's held for. I mean, certainly we can call on them to dump it after a while if they haven't found anything.
All right, now here's something else, and Jane, I'm going to come to you first on this. Okay, real quick, 30 seconds, then I got to move on. Go ahead, Jane.
Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. You hand people a blank check and say you have unlimited power. They are going to abuse that power. That's human nature. You can go to the bank on it.
The worst thing is they're going to find out that I happen to call my parents every day. So there you go. That's the worst thing that happens in all these phone calls. You're right. All right, let's move on a little bit. The Boston terror shooting. They get a guy, the FBI's been watching him for some time. They stop him and another guy allegedly because they were going to go after and start beheading Boston police officers. Jane, let's begin here. Does the public just blanket accept a shooting when we slap a terror label on it? Because that's what we're told. This is terror. Nobody seems to get that upset. But if that label's not on it, then people start to question a little bit. It seems as if we're willing to go with that terror label if there's a really good slice of evidence about it.
Well, I think it's a very dangerous word, and it can be misused, to wit, eco-terrorists. The real eco-terrorists are the corporations that are destroying our environment, not the people who are trying to stop the corporations from destroying the environment. But in this case, this is a man who turned around with a knife and lunged at officers, and they defended themselves. And they were appropriate in doing so, whether he was a quote-unquote terrorist or not. I think that the case is clear that they had to defend themselves. He had a knife, and he lunged at them. Case closed.
Well, so here we have, and again, Sean, we call it a terror issue here. And again, I'll tell you what, Sean, let's even say something else here. I give the authorities in Massachusetts a lot of credit for this because there was immediately a lot of tweeting going out here saying that this guy was shot in the back 3 times and that he was on the phone with his father. They put that video out right away that the cops had and said that is not what happened. That puts this to a stop right away and tells people this really was at least closer to terror than just another shooting by cops and authorities.
And getting back to our previous discussion, it's a good example of why more information is better than less, because certainly we all find out about what's going on better. I mean, yeah, your point about the question of the word and how that's used. Yeah, certainly that designation is has been very much abused in the last 14 years for obvious reasons, because it's one of those things that does provide a free pass on things. A lot of times, and this is where I do sometimes agree actually with some people on the left. We can simply investigate this stuff as crime, and not need to put this into it. I mean, the question of motive is a question of motive, and that just simply is something you discuss at the trial level.
All right.
I mean, if they did it for some political reason, that's something you can convict them on. It's not necessarily a change in what actually happened.
We're down to 60 seconds. Here we go. Last shot. I talked about this in the lead in here. New Jersey now has a bill on the books here that says people smoking with kids 17 or under in the car, you can be ticketed. The fine runs $100. I'll tell you what, Sean, I'm going to start with this. I think it's a form of child abuse myself, but I'm a vehement anti-smoker, so I take myself out of it right away. Do you think this is going over the line?
Well, as somebody who grew up a child of a parent who did smoke and often smoked while I was in the car, I don't think it hurt me much. Some people may disagree. They may think it may actually explain some of my present derangements. But yeah, I think it's going a little bit over the line. I mean, we have to give parents some leeway, in dealing with their kids and running their lives. And I think this goes too far.
All right, 30 seconds, Jane. The parents say that they have the right, but then again, the kid doesn't have a right to make a choice.
Well, look, I think that I also had a dad who smoked Pall Malls, if you can remember them. Oof. I don't even know if they still exist. And sadly, he died of lung cancer. But no, I think there are worse things that parents are doing around their kids. For example, their eating habits. If their eating habits are really bad and they're suffering from obesity, there's a very statistical good chance their kids will. So we have to look at parental influence, but I don't think passing laws like this is the way.
We are curing the world's ills here every day, thanks to people like Jane Velez-Mitchell and Sean Higgins. I thank you both for being here. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Coming up on MidPoint, we're going to head for the worst nation to be in charge of United Nations civil rights. Whom is that? You're going to find out next on MidPoint.